All right, so you're ready to like really dive into the world of web development, see how to turn coding chops into a real career.
We're breaking it all down today.
Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into this really popular podcast I found called Code to Cash.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good info, but we're going to like distill it down into the absolute essentials for you, whether you're just starting out or you're aiming for that like senior dev role.
We're going way beyond just the basics here. You're not going to hear us just like regurgitating what Code to Cash says. We're giving you a roadmap.
Love that, a roadmap, like a cheat sheet for success.
Exactly.
Speaking of cheat sheets, Code to Cash, they really hammer home those like super core languages, right?
Yeah.
What's the deal with this whole holy trinity thing they keep mentioning?
It's not just hype. It's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You got to know them.
Right.
But, like, it's more than just, like, checking them off a list. You really got to get how they work together.
One thing to know them, it's another thing to use them.
Right, yeah. Think of HTML as, like, the blueprint of your website, right?
Yeah.
Then CSS is all about the style. Colors, fonts, you know, making it look good. Then JavaScript comes in and makes it all, like, come alive, you know? Makes it interactive.
So knowing those three is obviously essential, but it sounds like it's deeper than just like, yep, I know HTML. It's about using them, right?
Yeah, it's like anyone can learn to use a hammer and nails, right?
Yeah.
But it takes a real carpenter to build like a beautiful piece of furniture.
Totally.
And Code to Cash, they stress that.
Okay.
It's mastering these core languages that separates, you know, someone who's just messing around from a real professional.
It's like the difference between, you know, dabbling in a bit of painting and then being like, a master painter.
Exactly.
So you've got a handle on this holy trinity now.
Okay.
What's the next step on this roadmap? I keep hearing a lot about these front-end frameworks.
Okay. Yeah.
What should we know about those?
So that's where things get fun. Frameworks. Code to Cash digs into the big three. You got React, Angular, Dot, and Vue.js. They're like pre-built toolkits, you know? They streamline the whole development process, especially for websites that are more on the complex side.
Makes sense.
React, for example, it's known for this component-based structure.
Yeah.
Which is great because it lets you reuse a lot of your code, which makes you way more efficient.
So instead of starting from scratch every time, you've got these like pre-made components.
Exactly.
What about the other frameworks?
So Angular, that's developed by Google, it's more robust, I guess you could say. It's like a full-on workshop, right, compared to React, which is like a really well-stocked toolkit.
Okay.
Angular just gives you a wider range of tools and features right off the bat, which is really helpful when you're working on these massive, complicated projects.
Okay, so React's more streamlined. Angular's more comprehensive.
Yeah.
Where does that leave Vue.js?
Vue.js is interesting. It's really adaptable, and it's actually pretty beginner-friendly, too.
Okay.
It's like, imagine a really versatile set of building blocks, you know? It might not have absolutely everything like Angular does, but it's really easy to pick up. Good for experimenting.
Cool. So you can kind of like test the waters.
Yeah. And for smaller projects, it's great. Or if you're someone who likes to have a lot of flexibility, that's where Vue.js shines.
I like that Code to Cash really emphasizes finding what works for you, for your style of coding, for your project, what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like choosing the right tool from that toolkit.
Exactly.
But it's easy to get caught up in all the front-end stuff.
Yeah.
We can't forget about the back end, though.
Oh, yeah. The back end, the behind-the-scenes stuff, that's where the real magic happens.
Right.
Code to Cash really stresses that you can't have a website that actually works without a solid back end. They compare it to a restaurant, right? The front end is like the dining room, all decorated, where the customers go.
Right.
But the back end, that's the kitchen.
Right, where the magic happens.
Right.
So the front end might be what draws people in initially, but the back end is what keeps them coming back.
100%. And to build a really strong back end, you got to understand server-side languages, databases, and how to like connect everything to the front end seamlessly.
Right, it's got to all work together.
Exactly. Code to Cash highlights some languages like Node.js and Python.
Okay.
Both are super popular, but for different reasons. Like Node.js is amazing for applications that need to be really fast, really responsive, chat apps, collaborative tools, stuff like that, because it handles data so well.
I see. So it all depends on what you're trying to build.
Yeah, the type of project is key. And then there's Python, which is really versatile, and it's known for being easy to read.
Right.
There are frameworks built on Python too, like Django and Flask. They're crazy popular, especially for anything data science-y or machine learning.
Interesting.
But it doesn't stop there. Code to Cash reminds us that databases, they're like the heart of your backend. They're like these giant organized filing cabinets where you keep all your website's data. They break down the two
SQL and NoSQL databases.
Databases, right. They always seem kind of mysterious. I know they're important, but
behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So coded cache breaks them down into two main types, remember. You got your SQL databases and your NoSQL databases.
Right, SQL and NoSQL. So SQL, those are the ones that are like super organized, right?
Exactly. Think of them like those old school spreadsheets. Rows and columns, everything perfectly in its place.
Okay.
They're great for data that's like predictable, customer details, orders, anything you can fit neatly into a table.
Structured.
Yeah, exactly. Code to cache brings up examples like MySQL and PostgreSQL as your classic SQL databases. Super reliable, used everywhere.
If SQL is all about that structure, what about NoSQL? It seems a little more, I don't know, free-flowing.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
NoSQL is all about flexibility. It's built for that messy data that doesn't fit nicely in a spreadsheet. Think like social media posts, sensor data, stuff like that.
Things that aren't uniform.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One example they give in code to cache is MongoDB, which stores data more like documents instead of stuffing them in tables.
So instead of forcing it into that spreadsheet format, it's more adaptable.
It's like using, I don't know, note cards instead of spreadsheet. You've got more freedom.
I like that. Okay, so you choose your database based on what you need to store.
Exactly. The right tool for the job.
Always. But how do you actually connect that back end to the front end? That's where it gets tricky for me.
That, my friend, is where APIs come in.
APIs.
Application programming interfaces. They're like the messengers that let different parts of your website or even different apps talk to each other.
Okay.
Like code to cache uses this analogy of a waiter in a restaurant.
Okay, yeah.
The API takes your order, that's from the front end, the customer, and then relays it to the kitchen, the back end, to actually make the food.
The unsung heroes, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Totally. And they're used everywhere, integrating payment systems, pulling in data from other sources, you name it. But here's the thing. Building a website usually isn't a one-person job. You've got teams of developers all working on the same code.
Yeah.
That's where version control comes in. And code to cache really hammers this home.
Right. Git and GitHub. They've always seemed kind of intimidating to me. What's the big deal?
Imagine everyone on your team working on the same document at the same time.
Oh, that sounds awful.
Right. Total chaos. That's what coding without version control is like. Git is like having a time machine for your code. Every single change, every tweak, it's all tracked.
So you can go back to a previous version if something breaks.
Exactly. You can merge changes smoothly, avoid those nightmare scenarios of conflicting code. It's a lifesaver.
It's like having a safety net.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you've got platforms like GitHub, which take it a step further. Now you have this central hub to store your code, work with your team, even show off your projects to the world.
Right. Code to cache mentions how crucial that is for building your portfolio.
It's huge. It's like your online resume, basically.
It makes sense.
It shows what you can do. But it's not just about managing the code. It's about that whole collaborative aspect, showing potential employers how you work.
It's like its own skill set, working with Git and GitHub.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this all leads us to another big one, deployment.
Deployment. That's when you actually put your website out there for the world to see.
Exactly. You're taking it from your computer and putting it on the internet. And code to cache breaks it down in a way that makes it way less scary.
Okay, good.
So first up, hosting providers. They basically rent you space on their servers. That's what makes your website accessible online. They mention some big names, AWS, Google Cloud, but also some smaller ones like Netlify and Heroku. Each has its own pros and cons,
Yeah.
Depends on your budget, what you're building, all that.
So many choices.
Right. It's like choosing a launch pad for your website.
Right.
And then they get into containers, specifically Docker.
Containers,
Yeah.
like Tupperware for code.
Kind of. Imagine you could pack up your whole application with all its code and everything it needs to run into one neat little package.
Okay.
That's Docker. It makes your application super portable, meaning it can run smoothly on any machine, no matter what.
So no more compatibility issues.
Exactly.
Mm.
And then, to streamline this whole deployment process, they talk about CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration, and continuous deployment.
Mm.
Sounds complicated, but
It does sound a little complicated.
it's all about automation, making your life easier.
Okay, that's good.
Imagine every time you change your code, it automatically gets tested.
Okay.
Like a robot inspector making sure everything's good to go.
Gotcha.
That's continuous integration.
Okay.
And then, if everything checks out, boom, Your code is automatically put on the server, ready for users. That's continuous deployment.
So it's like an assembly line for your code, from you writing it to it being live on the internet.
Basically. And code to cache talks about how much of an advantage this gives you as a developer.
I bet everything's happening so fast these days.
Exactly. They mention tools like Jenkins and GitHub Actions that can set up these automatic pipelines for you.
It's amazing how much tech has changed how we build websites.
Right.
But with all this automation, code to cache still remembers the human side of things.
Of course.
Soft skills. Right?
Absolutely. They dedicate a whole section to it, and it's eye-opening.
Really?
They focus on problem solving as like the most fundamental skill.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's more than just fixing bugs. It's about how you approach any challenge. You got to be logical. You got to analyze.
Break it down into smaller steps.
Exactly. And then you've got communication, especially when you're working with a team.
Right, you got to be able to explain what you're doing.
Exactly. If you can't communicate your ideas clearly, you're going to hit a wall. Whether it's explaining something technical to a colleague or presenting to a client, good communication is key.
Code to cache makes it clear that being able to talk about your work is just as important as the work itself.
For sure. And then there's time management.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds with coding, lose track of deadlines.
Tell me about it.
So code to cache is like you got to set realistic goals, know what to prioritize, and just manage your time well.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Right. But then they bring up the soft skill that ties everything together.
What's that?
Continuous learning.
Oh, you mean like always be learning new stuff?
Always. Web development is constantly changing. New tech, new languages. You got to keep up.
Otherwise you get left behind.
100%.
Yeah.
Code to cache recommends a few things. Experiment with new tools, check out online communities, and of course, listen to good podcasts.
Well, we're glad you're here, but let's get to the big question.
The big one, yeah.
How do you actually turn all this into a job? From code to cache, as they say.
Okay, so they give some solid advice on that. Your portfolio is huge, but not just any portfolio. It's got to showcase your skills in a way that grabs attention.
It's like your resume, but for coding.
Exactly. They highlight GitHub as a good platform for this. It not only hosts your projects, it shows how you use version control, how you collaborate.
Makes sense. So you're not just telling them you can code, you're showing them.
Exactly. But code to cache also emphasizes networking. Go to events, connect with other developers. It's not just what you know, it's who you know.
Building those relationships.
Exactly. And of course, there's the classic job hunt, tailoring your resume, nailing those interviews.
The whole shebang.
Code to cache really encourages people to be strategic about it and confident.
They really do cover a lot. It's a great roadmap for any level of developer. So if our listeners take away one thing from all this, what should it be?
I think it's consistency. Code to cache makes it clear that a successful career in web development isn't about some overnight miracle.
Right.
It's about showing up every day, putting in the work.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got to break down those big goals into smaller steps and just keep at it.
One step at a time.
And you know what? That actually leads into the final question Code to Cache asks. What's one small step you can take today to get closer to your web dev goals?
I like that. It's a good question to ask yourself.
It could be anything. Practicing some code for 15 minutes, checking out a new framework, even just talking to another developer online.
You can start somewhere.
Exactly. The key is to do something no matter how small and make it a habit.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Code to Cache, remember, your web dev journey begins with a single step.
And it doesn't matter if you're just starting or you're already a pro, consistency is key. Never stop learning. And remember, there's a whole community out there to support you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, happy coding, everyone!